Marcus Hale woke up at 4:45 in the morning, just like he did every day. The apartment was freezing. The old radiator near the window made loud clicking sounds, but no heat ever came out anymore. The building manager kept saying someone would fix it soon, but soon had already turned into almost a month. Marcus sat up slowly and rubbed his hands together. His room was small enough that he could touch both walls if he stretched his arms out. There was a coffee mug on the floor beside the mattress, 2 work shirts hanging from a nail in the wall, and a little stack of unpaid bills sitting near the sink. He looked at them for a second, then looked away. He got dressed in silence. Heavy boots, grey work jacket, worn gloves. In the kitchen, there was not much left. Half a loaf of bread, a small container of soup from 2 nights ago, 3 bananas turning brown, and a bag of oats. Marcus packed the soup and bread into an old lunch container and poured himself a cup of water from the tap. He stood there for a moment staring out the tiny kitchen window at the dark city outside. Rain again. Port Raven always looked tired when it rained. Marcus was 34 years old and worked for the city transit department repairing underground rail tunnels. It was hard work. Dirty work. The kind people only noticed when it stopped getting done. Most days nobody even looked at him. And Marcus was fine with that. He had spent the last 7 years trying to live quietly, spend carefully, and stay out of trouble. Sometimes that worked. Sometimes life got there first. The city had changed after first contact. Everybody said that. 28 years ago, the first alien ships arrived over Earth's oceans and stayed there for 3 days without speaking. No attacks. No demands. Just silence. People thought war was coming. Instead, trade agreements came first. Then shared cities. Then refugee districts. And after enough years passed, humans and aliens learn how to stand beside each other without ever really becoming close. Especially in places like Port Raven. The richer neighborhoods stayed mostly human. The poorer ones became mixed. Humans. Refugees. Workers. Families nobody important cared much about. Marcus walked through one of those districts every morning on the way to the rail station. The sidewalks were wet. Steam rose from vents in the street. Old signs buzzed overhead with broken lights. A few alien workers stood near a bus stop wearing factory uniforms. Across the street, a human woman sold hot tea from a metal cart while pretending not to notice anyone around her. Everyone kept moving. Nobody talked much. That was normal. Marcus pulled his jacket tighter as cold wind pushed through the street. Then he saw them. At first, he almost walked past. 3 small figures sitting beneath the cracked shelter of an old transit stop. Still. Quiet. Too quiet. They were Nareth children. Marcus recognized the species right away. Thin bodies. Silver-grey skin. Large black eyes that reflected light like glass. Their arms wrapped tightly around themselves as if they were trying to hold warmth inside. The smallest one could not have been older than 6. A torn blanket covered their legs. People walked past them without slowing down. One man actually stepped around them like they were trash left on the sidewalk. Marcus kept walking too. At least for a moment. His boots splashed through rainwater as he moved down the block, but something heavy settled in his chest. He tightened his grip on the lunch container. Kept walking. Then stopped. The city moved around him. Cars passed. People crossed streets. Somewhere far away, a train horn echoed through the rain. Marcus closed his eyes for 1 second. He already knew what would happen if he turned back. No lunch today. An empty stomach during a 10-hour shift. Probably another headache before noon. He did not exactly have extra food to give away. But those kids looked colder than he felt. And hungrier too. Marcus let out a slow breath. Then turned around. The children noticed him immediately. All 3 became tense. The oldest moved slightly in front of the younger 2 without standing up. Protective. Careful. Like they had learned not to trust people anymore. Marcus understood that look. He walked slowly toward them and crouched down so he would not seem so tall. For a second nobody spoke. Rain tapped softly against the metal roof above them. Then Marcus opened his lunch container. The smell of soup drifted into the cold air. The youngest child stared at it without blinking. Marcus tore the bread into pieces and placed everything carefully on the ground between them. "It's okay," he said quietly. The children did not move. Not yet. Their eyes kept shifting between the food and Marcus's face, like they were waiting for a trick. Across the street, somebody laughed. A man carrying shopping bags shook his head. "Don't encourage them," he muttered while passing by. Marcus ignored him. He sat down against the side of the transit shelter and waited. After a long moment, the oldest child slowly reached forward. Very slowly. Like the food might disappear. She handed part of the bread to the others before taking any for herself. Marcus noticed that immediately. The oldest always made sure the younger ones ate first. The smallest child burned his mouth on the soup because he was eating too fast. Marcus looked away and pretended not to notice. Something about that felt kinda. The rain kept falling. Cars kept moving. Nobody stopped. After a few minutes, the oldest girl looked toward Marcus again. Her English sounded rough, careful, like every word had been memorized instead of learned. "Why help us?" she asked softly. Marcus thought about it. Honestly, he did not have some big answer. No speech. No lesson. No philosophy. So he just shrugged a little. "Because I had food," he said. The girl stared at him for another second. Then looked down at the soup again like she did not fully understand the answer. Marcus stayed there until they finished eating. Then he stood up, brushed rainwater from his jacket, and headed toward work with an empty lunch container in his hand and nothing in his stomach. By noon, Marcus was already feeling the hunger. The headache started first. Then the shaking in his hands. He was standing waist-deep inside a maintenance tunnel under Line 4 when his coworker, Ben Mercer, noticed him leaning against the wall longer than usual. Ben was the kind of man who talked constantly. Tall. Broad shoulders. Always chewing gum. Always complaining about something. Most people in the transit department either loved him or got tired of him after 5 minutes. Marcus did not mind him. Ben climbed down the ladder carrying a toolbox and narrowed his eyes. "You look terrible," he said. "I'm fine." "That means you're definitely not fine." Marcus tried to wave him off, but Ben kept staring. Then he noticed the empty lunch container sitting near the tunnel wall. Ben frowned. "You forgot your food." Marcus hesitated for a second, then said quietly, "Gave it away." Ben blinked. "To who?" Marcus kept tightening bolts along the rail line while answering. 3 kids near East District. Human kids. Marcus shook his head. Nareth. Ben stopped chewing. For a moment he just stared at Marcus like he was trying to decide whether this was stupid or admirable. Probably both. "You gave your entire lunch to refugee kids." Marcus shrugged. They looked hungry. Ben let out a long breath through his nose. "Man." That was all he said at first. But an hour later, when the lunch break came, Ben disappeared without saying anything and came back carrying 2 hot sandwiches wrapped in paper. He tossed one toward Marcus. Marcus caught it. "You don't gotta do that," he said. "Yeah, well," Ben muttered, sitting down beside him. "You don't gotta starve yourself either." Marcus smiled a little. Ben pointed at him. "And if this turns into some heroic martyr thing, I'm quitting immediately." That made Marcus laugh for the first time all day. But later that night, lying awake in his freezing apartment, Marcus kept thinking about those children. The way they looked at the food. The way the oldest girl fed the others first. The way all 3 of them seemed surprised someone had stopped at all. Sleep came slowly. And when morning arrived, Marcus woke up an hour earlier than usual. The apartment was still cold. Still quiet. Still nearly empty. But this time he pulled a cooking pot from the cabinet before getting dressed. Rice was cheap. Beans too. If he stretched things carefully, he could make enough for 4 people instead of 1. Maybe more. Steam filled the tiny kitchen while rain tapped softly against the windows again. Marcus packed the food into old plastic containers he normally used for work supplies. When he reached the transit stop that morning, the children were already there, curled together beneath the shelter, waiting. The smallest one noticed him first. His eyes widened immediately. Then he stood so fast the blanket slipped off his shoulders. The older girl pulled him back gently, but Marcus could already see something different in their faces. Hope. Small. Careful. But there. Marcus crouched down again and opened the containers. Warm steam rolled into the cold morning air. This time the children moved closer immediately. still cautious, but less afraid. The youngest smiled while holding the bowl with both hands. Marcus learned their names slowly over the next 2 weeks, or at least the closest versions his human mouth could manage. The older girl called herself Lyra. Her brothers were Sarin and Tov. Tov was the youngest. He had a habit of waving every time Marcus appeared, even if his hands were full of food. Marcus started bringing larger meals after that. Rice, soup, flatbread, sometimes cooked vegetables when they were cheap enough at the market. He began waking up before sunrise every day just to prepare enough. And once he started noticing those 3 children, he started noticing others too. A Nareth boy sleeping behind a closed pharmacy. 2 sisters sharing scraps near an alley drain. A little girl sitting alone near the overpass wearing clothes too thin for the cold weather. Marcus had walked past these streets for years, but now it felt like somebody had suddenly turned the lights on. And once you see something clearly, it becomes harder to ignore. One morning, Marcus finally asked questions. Quiet ones. Careful ones. He spoke with an older Nareth worker near the factory buses. Then a tired volunteer at a local shelter. Then a woman who worked night shifts distributing blankets downtown. What he learned sat heavy in his stomach for the rest of the day. There were at least 23 refugee children scattered through the district with no stable food support. No housing system. No protection program. Nothing. The city called them unregistered dependents. The Interstellar Refugee Office said processing delays were still under review. And while both sides argued paperwork, children stayed hungry. Marcus leaned back in his chair that night staring at the ceiling above his apartment. 23 kids. 23. He barely knew how to help 3. A knock suddenly came at the door. Ben walked in carrying a greasy paper bag full of groceries. Bread. Canned soup. Rice. Cheap vegetables. Marcus looked confused. Ben shrugged awkwardly. "My sister works near East District," he said. "She told me you've been feeding half the neighborhood before work." Marcus rubbed the back of his neck. "It's not like that." "Sure," Ben said. "And I'm secretly an astronaut." Marcus laughed quietly. Ben set the groceries on the counter. Then his expression became serious. "How many kids are we talking about?" Marcus hesitated. "More than 20. Ben's smile faded immediately. The apartment became quiet. Rain tapped softly against the windows again. Finally Ben spoke. "That many?" Marcus nodded. For a long moment neither man said anything. Then Ben leaned against the counter and crossed his arms. "So what's the plan?" Marcus looked up. "What?" "You heard me," Ben said. "What's the plan?" Marcus stared at him. Because the truth was, until that moment, he had not allowed himself to think that far ahead. The next person to join them was Ben's sister, Elena Mercer. She ran a tiny community center near the River District. The building used to be an old laundromat before the city shut it down years earlier. Now it had peeling paint, weak heating, and folding chairs that squeaked every time someone sat down. But Elena made the place feel alive. She was sharp, fast-talking, always moving. The kind of person who looked exhausted all the time but somehow kept going anyway. Marcus met her 3 nights later. She listened quietly while he explained everything. The children, the streets, the food, the city reports. She did not interrupt once. When he finally finished, Elena leaned back in her chair and folded her arms. "So," she said, "we either ignore it, or we do something stupid and difficult." Ben grinned immediately. "Those are usually our best ideas." Marcus looked unsure. "I don't even know where to start." Elena pointed at him. "Yes, you do. You already started." That sentence stayed with him. Because deep down, she was right. He had already started the moment he turned around at that transit stop. After that, things moved quickly. Marcus cooked. Ben carried supplies before work. Elena organized everything else. At first it was small. Just extra containers of soup and bread handed out quietly in the mornings. Then blankets. Then spare jackets. Then names. So many names. Marcus began memorizing faces across the district. Children hiding near heating vents. Children sleeping in abandoned storefronts. Children pretending not to be hungry because they were embarrassed to ask. Some mornings the food ran out too fast. Those were the hardest days. Marcus hated watching children try to act grateful for half portions. But somehow Elena always found another bag of rice. And Ben always showed up carrying more than he complained about. Word spread slowly through the district. Not through advertisements. Not through news channels. Just person to person. Quietly. A human mechanic who shared meals. An old community center near the river. Hot food before sunrise. That was enough. But not everyone liked what they were doing. One morning, Marcus arrived to find a warning notice taped to the shelter wall. Unauthorized support of non-registered refugees may result in civic penalties. Ben read it twice. Then laughed. That's a very fancy way of saying stop being nice. Marcus did not laugh. Because underneath the printed notice, somebody had written another message by hand. Take care of your own species first. Elena ripped the paper down immediately. But the mood stayed heavy all morning. A week later, somebody threw a bottle through the community center window during breakfast service. Glass shattered across the floor. Children screamed. Marcus moved instinctively, pulling Tov behind him before the second bottle hit the outside wall. Nobody was hurt. But after that, Marcus started walking the younger kids home whenever he could. The district suddenly felt colder than before. Not because of the weather. Because of people. Still, they kept going. Every morning before dawn, Marcus stood in that tiny kitchen cooking massive pots of rice and soup while steam fogged the windows. The apartment smelled constantly of onions, broth, and cheap spices now. He slept less. Worked longer. Ate smaller meals himself. But strangely, he felt more awake than he had in years. One freezing morning, while Marcus was setting bowls onto a folding table outside the center, an older Nareth man approached him slowly. Marcus recognized him immediately. He had seen the elder several times near the labor district but never spoken to him directly. The man's silver-gray skin was marked with pale lines that came with age. His upper hands trembled slightly when he moved. A small translator device rested against his collar. The elder stopped a few feet away. For a moment he simply watched Marcus handing food to the children. Then the translator spoke in a calm mechanical voice. You are the human called Marcus Hale. Marcus nodded carefully. Yeah. The elder looked toward the children gathered around the tables. Especially Lyra and her brothers. Then back at Marcus. You carry yourself as bonded kin. Marcus frowned slightly. I don't know what that means. The elder became quiet, as if choosing his words carefully. In Nareth tradition, the translator said slowly, to feed a child outside your bloodline is not considered charity. Marcus listened. The elder continued. It is a declaration. Wind moved softly through the street outside. Several children looked over curiously while holding bowls of soup. The translator buzzed again. When someone feeds a hungry child repeatedly, protects them, sacrifices personal comfort for them, they are no longer viewed as outsider. Marcus blinked. The elder lowered his head slightly. They become bonded kin. Marcus stared at him for a second. I'm just feeding people, he said quietly. The elder's dark eyes softened. Yes, the translator replied. That is why it matters. Marcus did not fully understand the weight of that conversation. Not yet. What he did not know was that 3 days earlier, the elder had already submitted a formal cultural report to the Interstellar Refugee Council. And that report was spreading much faster than anyone in Port Raven realized. The report reached the Interstellar Refugee Council 7 days later. Most council reports were long, cold, technical, numbers, statistics, policy failures, population movement. This one was different. It was short, only 14 pages, and almost all of it focused on one human man in a freezing city district who woke up before sunrise every day to cook food for children that were not his own. At first, several council members assumed it was political theater. Humans had a reputation across many systems. Aggressive, divided, territorial, helpful, sometimes, but usually only when there was profit, attention, or power attached to it. The idea that a human maintenance worker with almost nothing would repeatedly feed refugee children without asking for payment, recognition, or status. That confused people. So the council assigned an observer. Her translated name was closest to Voice Between Quiet Stars. She arrived in Port Raven on a grey Thursday morning. Rain covered the streets again. The observer expected cameras, public speeches, organized charity campaigns. Instead, she found Marcus Hale standing outside a broken community center arguing with a city inspection officer while holding a giant cooking pot against his chest. "You can't block the sidewalk with tables," the officer snapped. "The kids need somewhere to sit," Marcus answered. "That isn't my department." Marcus looked exhausted already. Steam rose from the pot into the freezing air while children waited quietly behind him holding empty bowls. The observer stood across the street watching silently. Nobody noticed her. Not at first. Marcus was too busy trying to keep soup from spilling, while Ben dragged folding tables back toward the wall. Elena was inside sweeping broken glass from another cracked window. The observer activated a recording device hidden inside her sleeve. Then she simply watched. For nearly 2 hours. She watched Marcus serve every child before making himself a bowl. She watched him kneel to help Tov tie a torn bootlace. She watched him pretend not to notice when Lyra slipped half her bread into her younger brother's pocket. She watched him laugh when Ben complained. And she watched something else too. The children trusted him completely. Not cautiously. Not carefully. Completely. That mattered. Later that afternoon, the observer sat alone inside a rented transit pod reviewing her notes. Rain rolled slowly down the windows beside her. Finally, she began typing her report. The first line read, "The human appears unaware that his actions are extraordinary." She stopped there for a moment, then continued, "He behaves as though feeding refugee children is the normal responsibility of any person capable of doing so." The report moved across council networks faster than expected. Species from 17 systems reviewed it within days. Some were skeptical. Others were deeply affected. Because in many cultures across council space, the act of feeding another species' children carried enormous social meaning. It represented protection, responsibility, shared survival, bonded kin. And according to the elders' testimony, Marcus Hale had performed that role willingly without ever understanding the cultural importance behind it. That detail spread everywhere. A human who did not help for honor, but simply because somebody was hungry. The story reached news channels first, then refugee advocacy groups, then planetary delegates. And suddenly, Port Raven's forgotten district became the center of conversations happening across multiple worlds. Marcus, meanwhile, knew almost none of this. He was too busy cooking. One morning, Elena burst into the kitchen holding her tablet. "You are not going to believe this," she said. Marcus looked up from cutting vegetables. "Believe what?" Ben nearly dropped a supply crate laughing. "Buddy," he said, "apparently space government knows who you are now." Marcus frowned immediately. "That sounds bad." "It probably is," Ben admitted. Elena turned the screen toward him. A headline filled the display. "Human Transit Worker Sparks Galactic Refugee Debate." Marcus stared at it, then looked genuinely uncomfortable. "No," he muttered immediately. "Absolutely not." Ben started laughing harder. "What do you mean, absolutely not?" "You can't refuse being famous." "Watch me." But attention kept growing. Within weeks, council delegates proposed a new interspecies refugee nutrition policy requiring all member cities to provide minimum food access for displaced children. The proposal referenced Port Raven directly, and specifically mentioned Marcus's actions as proof that small community support systems worked better than endless delayed paperwork. That part shocked him the most, because Marcus never thought he was changing anything important. In his mind, he was just feeding kids breakfast. Back in Port Raven, city officials suddenly became much more cooperative. Warnings disappeared. Permit approvals moved faster. The fines they had threatened Marcus with were quietly cancelled. And then something even stranger happened. Funding arrived. Not a huge amount, but enough. Enough to repair part of the community center. Enough to buy better heaters. Enough to replace folding tables with real ones. Enough to serve hot meals every morning instead of only a few days each week. Ben painted the front door himself. Poorly. Very poorly. Elena laughed so hard she almost cried when she saw it. Marcus just shook his head and repainted half of it after work. The children decided to name the place themselves. They called it the Warm Room, because for many of them, it was the warmest place they knew. The first winter after the Warm Room opened was the coldest Port Raven had seen in 11 years. Ice gathered along sidewalks before sunrise. The old pipes inside the district froze constantly. Some mornings the wind cut through the streets so hard it felt like breathing glass. But every day before dawn, lights came on inside the Warm Room. And every day, children arrived. At first there were 20. Then 30. Then more. Humans. Nareth. Other refugee families from species Marcus had never even learned the names of before. Nobody cared much about that inside the building. Once the food started being served, everyone just looked like tired people trying to get warm. Marcus liked that. The room was still far from perfect. The heaters rattled loudly. The chairs never matched. And one corner of the ceiling leaked whenever it rained too hard. But it felt alive now. Real. Ben handled repairs between shifts at the rail tunnels. Elena organized volunteers and somehow kept paperwork from drowning all of them. Marcus cooked. That part never changed. Every morning giant pots of soup steamed across the kitchen while the windows fogged white from heat. The smell of bread and broth filled the entire building before sunrise. And slowly, the children stopped looking afraid. That was the first thing Marcus noticed. At the beginning, they ate quickly. Quietly. Like food might disappear at any second. Now some of them laughed while eating. Some argued over seats. Some asked for seconds without apologizing first. It was such a small change. But to Marcus, it felt enormous. One snowy morning, Lyra approached him while he stood washing dishes in the kitchen sink. She was taller now. Healthier too. The dark circles under her eyes had faded over the months. In her upper hand she carried a folded piece of paper. "Marcus," she said softly. He dried his hands on a towel. "What's up?" She held the paper toward him carefully. Marcus opened it slowly. Inside was a drawing. Simple. Uneven. Made with dark ink. It showed a small room filled with children sitting around tables. Steam rising from bowls. Snow falling outside the windows. And in the center of the picture stood one tired-looking human holding a giant cooking spoon. Marcus stared at it quietly. Then he noticed the words written underneath in careful English. Bonded kin. For a long moment he said nothing. The kitchen sounds faded into the background. The rattling heater. Running water. Children laughing in the next room. Marcus folded the drawing carefully. Very carefully. Then slipped it into the inside pocket of his jacket close to his chest. Lyra watched him. "You keep it?" she asked. Marcus nodded once. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I'll keep it." She smiled. Not the nervous little smile she had when they first met beneath that transit shelter. A real one. Then she ran back into the dining room before the younger kids could steal her seat. Marcus stood there for another second before returning to the dishes. Ben leaned against the kitchen doorway watching him with crossed arms. "You know," he said, "this whole thing's gotten pretty huge." Marcus sighed already. "Don't start." "I'm serious," Ben continued. "Council delegates know your name. New stations keep calling. Last week some university wanted you to give a speech." Marcus groaned immediately. "Absolutely not." Ben laughed. "You really hate attention that much." Marcus rinsed another bowl. Then shrugged. "It's not about me." Ben became quiet after that. Because deep down, he understood. Marcus never cared about becoming important. Never cared about headlines. Never cared whether people remembered his name. What mattered to him was much smaller than that. A warm meal. A safe room. Children not going to sleep hungry. That was enough. Outside, snow continued falling across Port Raven. People hurried through the streets with heads down against the cold. Most of them had no idea how much had started from one small decision beside a transit stop months earlier. One tired man. One lunch container. One moment where he could have kept walking. And didn't. That winter, the Interstellar Refugee Council officially passed the Child Nutritional Protection Charter across all member systems. Cities that ignored starving refugee children would now lose funding support and trade privileges. Thousands of children across multiple worlds gained guaranteed food access because of it. Reporters called it historic. Council members called it transformative. Marcus still called it breakfast. Late one evening after closing the warm room, Marcus switched off the kitchen lights and stood alone for a moment listening to the quiet building. The heaters hummed softly. Snow tapped against the windows. On one wall near the dining tables hung dozens of drawings children had made over the months. Families. Bowls of soup. Strange alien suns. Stick figures holding hands. Near the center hung Lyra's drawing. Bonded kin. Marcus looked at it for a long time. Then he smiled to himself. Small. Tired. But real. Because after all these months, he finally understood what the elder meant. Family was not always blood. Sometimes family was simply the people you chose not to abandon.